right, diving in today, getting kind of granular with it. We're talking Ramisco.
Ramisco.
Yeah, and honestly, I wasn't super familiar with it before we, started prepping for this deep dive, but it's been a really interesting journey so far.
It's a fascinating grape.
So for those who are maybe in the same boat as I was, Ramisco is this Portuguese grape, and it really has a super strong connection to one specific place, Colares, and we'll dive into like all the specifics of the region and everything later.
Mm.
But I guess like just to set the stage, what is it about this grape and I guess Colares that makes it so unique and yeah, worth a deep dive?
Well, I think a few things. First off, Ramisco is kind of a survivor. I mean, it's an ancient variety, and it's managed to thrive in this pretty challenging environment for, well, centuries, really. It produces these wines that are, they're unlike anything else. They have this incredible depth and complexity, and they age beautifully.
Okay, see, now you're already speaking my language. I'm
Oh.
always a fan of wines that can age gracefully. So where should we kick things off?
I think it makes sense to start with a little history lesson. Understanding where Ramisco comes from can help us appreciate what makes it so special.
Okay, history lesson it is. Take us back to the beginning.
All right, so we're going way back, talking about centuries of history here in the Colares region of Portugal. And even the origin stories of Ramisco, they're kind of shrouded in a little bit of local legend. Some stories say that the grape actually originated in the sandy dunes of Colares.
Wait, hold on. In the dunes? That's pretty wild.
Yeah, no, right. Imagine that, these vines kind of emerging from the sand. But it speaks to how well adapted Ramisco is to this environment. Now, there's also this other interesting theory that suggests a possible connection to the Pinot family of grapes.
No kidding. Pinot. So we could be talking like some distant cousin of Pinot Noir hanging out in Portugal.
That's the idea, but, pinning down the exact lineage of a grape that's been around for so long, it's a bit of a puzzle.
Okay, so ancient origins, potentially related to Pinot,
Hmm.
definitely adds a little intrigue to this story. And
Yeah.
you mentioned like this challenging environment that it's adapted to. It's got to be Colares, right?
Exactly. Colares is it's a pretty unique place, to say the least.
So paint us a picture. What's it like over there?
Imagine this, narrow strip of land right on the Atlantic coast. It's just west of Lisbon. And the Atlantic Ocean, it's a huge influence. I mean, it's dictating the climate, it's bringing the wind, the humidity, the whole nine yards. And then you've got these incredibly deep, sandy soils.
Sandy soils. That's got to be pretty unique for growing grapes.
It really is, and it's not the easiest place to grow grapes, let me tell you. I mean, these soils, they're very low in organic matter, which means the vines have to work extra hard to find nutrients.
Okay, so definitely not your typical vineyard setup. So how does all of that, like the location, the sand, how does that actually influence the Ramisco wines?
Well, that's where the terroir really comes into play. That combination of factors, the sandy soils, the cool Atlantic climate, the constant wind, it all shapes the character of the wines in a very specific way. You get these wines with pronounced acidity, they've got firm tannins, and there's often this really unique saline or iodine-like note that you find in the aromas.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that. Like a touch of the sea in the wine.
Exactly. It's like a subtle reminder of where these grapes are grown, right there on the coast, almost within reach of the ocean spray. And it's not just, a uniform blanket of sand and wind
Oh,
either.
so there's like variation within Colares.
Definitely. You've got microclimates within the region, so even small differences in proximity to the coast, slight changes in elevation or whether a vineyard is a little more sheltered from the wind, all these things can lead to subtle variations in the wines.
Huh. So even though it's this relatively small area, you can still find some diversity in the wines.
Mm.
Now, you mentioned earlier that Ramisco is a survivor and it's obviously adapted to this environment. But how? I mean, growing in sand, battling the wind, that can't be easy for a grapevine.
No, it's not. But Ramisco has developed some pretty impressive survival mechanisms over the centuries. For starters, its root system, it's incredibly deep. I mean, it has to be to reach down through that sand and find water and nutrients. And then, think about the salinity, the salt in the air and the soil from the ocean. A lot of grapevines would really struggle with that, but Ramisco, it's pretty tolerant to those conditions.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Like, it's almost built for this place.
Exactly. And then there's another key factor, and something we've kind of touched on already, those low-lying vines, almost buried in the sand. It's called chão de areia, which literally means sand floor.
Oh, yeah, I've seen pictures of that. It's a pretty striking image. Those vines just kind of sprawling out along the ground.
Yeah, it's a very traditional vine training system in Colares, and it actually serves a couple of important purposes. First off, it helps to protect the vines from the wind. It keeps them low to the ground, kind of shelters them a bit. And then, believe it or not, that sand actually acts like a heat reflector. It helps to warm the grapes and promote ripening, which is really important in that cool coastal climate.
So it's like this ingenious adaptation to this rather extreme environment.
Exactly. It's a testament to, centuries of viticultural knowledge and a deep understanding of this very specific place.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the grape itself. What are we looking at in terms of appearance, and what are some of its key characteristics as a grape variety?
All right, so if we get up close and personal with a Ramisco vine, you'll notice a few things. Its leaves are kind of medium-sized, and they have this shape that's somewhere between triangular and circular. They usually have 3 to 5 lobes. The bunches themselves, they're not huge, actually. They're relatively small to medium. And the berries, they're dark, almost blue-black, and they have these noticeably thick skins.
Thick skins, huh? Now, I know that usually translates into more tannins in the wine.
You got it. Those thick skins play a big role in the wine's structure, influencing both the tannins and the color. And another thing that's pretty characteristic of Ramisco is its long growing cycle. It buds and flowers pretty late in the spring, and then it takes its sweet time ripening, usually well into the fall.
Late ripening. Okay, so why is that significant?
It's super important, especially in this environment. That long, slow ripening period allows those grapes to develop complexity and balance, even with the challenges of the coast. The sugars and tannins, they have more time to develop fully and harmoniously, which is a big part of why Ramisco wines can be so layered and nuanced.
Makes sense. So slow and steady wins the race.
Right.
Right.
Pretty much. And that philosophy kind of carries over into the vineyard practices as well.
Okay, so how are they actually farming Ramisco in Colares? Are there any particular techniques that stand out?
Yeah, I mean, the approach is definitely tailored to the conditions. Pruning is done carefully, and like we talked about, the traditional Champ d'Area vine training system is still very much in use, although, some newer vineyards might be experimenting with more modern trellising systems. And then there's a growing emphasis on sustainability, using practices that are gentle on the environment and protect the biodiversity of the region.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially given how fragile that coastal ecosystem can be.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance between respecting tradition and, embracing innovation in a way that ensures the long-term health of the vineyards and the surrounding environment.
Now, I'm curious about something. Growing in sand, that doesn't exactly sound like the most fertile ground. Does it impact how much fruit the vines produce?
It definitely does. Yields in Colares tend to be pretty low, and that's partly due to the soil, partly due to the vine's natural vigor. It's not a grape that produces a ton of fruit, but, that often means that the grapes that do make it to harvest have a greater concentration of flavor.
So quality over quantity, right?
That's the idea. It's all about letting those grapes express the best of what the terroir has to offer.
All right, so the grapes are finally ripe, they're picked. Let's talk about what happens next. The winemaking. How do they go about turning these Ramisco grapes into wine, and what are the different styles of wine that they're making?
All right, so winemaking with Ramisco, it's kind of this interesting blend of traditional and modern techniques. You'll still find producers who are foot treading the grapes in these big granite lagares.
Foot treading. That's old school.
It is, but it's a method that's been used for centuries in Portugal, and it can be very effective for gently extracting color and tannins from the grapes. And then you've got fermentation happening in these big old cement vats.
So a lot of tradition involved. But you said there's also a modern side to it.
Absolutely. Temperature control during fermentation, that's pretty standard these days, and some producers are also using stainless steel tanks for fermentation. It really depends on the style of wine they're going for. But regardless of the equipment, winemakers have to be really mindful of those two key elements we talked about earlier: the acidity and the tannins.
Yeah, those are like the hallmarks of Ramisco.
Yeah.
So what kind of wines are we talking about here?
Well, the majority of Ramisco wines are red, and they tend to be light to medium-bodied with a real emphasis on freshness. So you get those vibrant fruit flavors, a nice mineral backbone, and then, of course, that lively acidity and those firm tannins that kind of give the wine structure and grip.
Okay, and you mentioned tannins a couple of times now. I know they can be a good thing, but they can also make wine taste a little astringent, right?
Yeah.
How do they manage that with Ramisco?
Yeah, tannins are definitely something that winemakers need to pay close attention to, and there are a few techniques they use to kind of tame them. Maceration, that's the process of leaving the grape skins in contact with the juice after pressing. It's really important. The longer the maceration, the more tannins are extracted, and the winemaker can control that to get the desired level of structure.
Hmm.
And then there's oak. Some producers will age their Ramisco wines in oak barrels, which can help to soften the tannins and add some additional complexity, but a lot of producers choose not to use oak or use it very sparingly.
So letting the grape and the place kind of speak for themselves.
Exactly. It's about showcasing the purity of the Ramisco fruit and that unique Colares terroir. And then, time also plays a role. Aging both in the bottle and sometimes in larger vessels before bottling, that can really help to mellow out those tannins and allow the wine's flavors to integrate and become more harmonious.
So patience is a virtue with Ramisco.
It definitely is. And I think that's part of what makes it so appealing. It's a wine that rewards careful cellaring and, thoughtful tasting.
Okay, so you've got a bottle of Ramisco, you've been patiently aging it, and it's finally time to open it. What should we expect in terms of aromas and flavors? What's that sensory experience like?
All right, so let's imagine we're pouring a glass of Ramisco. The first thing you're likely to notice is the aroma. It's often quite complex and intriguing. You might get some bright red fruit, things like cherry, red currant, sometimes a little bit of strawberry. And then there's often a floral element as well, maybe a hint of rose petals or violets.
Okay, so far it sounds pretty approachable.
Yeah, it's definitely not an overly heavy or jammy wine.
Hmm.
And then there's that signature saline note that we talked about earlier. It can be quite subtle, almost like a whiff of sea air, but it adds this really unique dimension to the aroma.
And that's that coastal influence coming through.
Right, exactly. And as the wine ages, you might start to pick up some more earthy or spicy notes as well. Things like leather, tobacco, maybe a touch of black pepper.
So it evolves over time. All
Yeah.
right, so we've got the aromas down. What about the palate? What happens when we actually take a sip?
On the palate, you'll find those red fruit flavors again, often with a nice mineral undercurrent. The acidity is really lively. It gives the wine this wonderful freshness and energy. And then the tannins, they provide structure and grip. They kind of make the wine feel firm and almost chewy in a way.
So it's a wine that makes you think, makes you pay attention.
It definitely is, and it's a wine that can age really well, partly because of that acidity and those tannins. They kind of act as preservatives, and they allow the wine's flavors to evolve and become more complex over time.
Okay, so not necessarily a wine to gulp down quickly. It's something to savor and appreciate.
Exactly. And if you're tasting Ramisco for the first time, I would recommend taking your time with it. Pay attention to how those flavors and aromas develop in the glass.
Any tips for getting the most out of the experience?
Yeah, I think serving temperature can make a difference. It's best to serve Ramisco a little bit cooler than you might serve a big, bold red wine, maybe around 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
That'll help to accentuate the freshness and the nuances of the aromas. And a good quality red wine glass, that'll also help to concentrate the aromas and allow them to open up.
Okay, so you've got your Ramisco, you've got it at the right temperature, you've got your fancy glass. Now, what are you eating with it? Let's talk food pairing. What plays well with this wine?
All right. Well, Ramisco, it's got a real affinity for Portuguese cuisine, which makes sense, right? Especially dishes from the Lisbon region where Colares is located.
Okay, so what are we talking about here? Give us some examples.
Well, seafood is a natural pairing. Think grilled sardines, octopus, those kinds of things. The acidity in the wine cuts through the richness of the fish, and those tannins can actually work really well with the texture of something like grilled octopus.
Yeah.
And then you've got richer seafood stews, things like calderada. The more structured Ramisco wines can stand up to those flavors.
Okay, so seafood and red wine, not always the most obvious pairing, but it sounds like it works really well here.
It does. And if you're feeling adventurous, you could even try pairing Ramisco with some of the richer meat dishes from Portugal, like cozido a portuguesa, which is kind of a hearty stew with different meats and vegetables.
Interesting. So it's got some versatility.
Yeah, I think so. It's a wine that can be both elegant and rustic, depending on the style and the pairing.
Okay, let's get into some of the official stuff. Ramisco is from this specific region, Colares, and I know that there are some rules and regulations surrounding the production of wine there. Can you give us a little rundown on the Colares DOC?
Sure. So DOC stands for Denominação de Origem Controlada, and it's basically Portugal's system for regulating wine production and ensuring quality and authenticity. And the Colares DOC, it was one of the oldest in Portugal. It was actually established back in 1908.
Wow, that's a long history of winemaking tradition.
Yeah, and the regulations for the Colares DOC are they're pretty strict. They dictate things like the grape varieties that can be used, the maximum yields allowed in the vineyards, and the minimum aging requirements for the wines. And for red wines from Colares, the primary grape has to be Ramisco.
Okay, so it's all about protecting the integrity and the reputation of the region, right?
Exactly. And it's about ensuring that, when you see that Colares DOC on a bottle of wine, you're getting something that's authentic and that truly reflects the character of this very special place.
Now, I know there are a number of producers making Ramisco wines in Colares. Any that we should be on the lookout for?
Oh, yeah, there are some real stars in Colares. The Adega Cooperativa de Colares, it's the local cooperative, and they've been making wine there for a long time. They produce a wide range of wines, and their Ramisco is it's really well regarded. It's often a great value for the money. And then you've got producers like Viúva Gomes, who are known for making some of the most elegant and age-worthy Ramisco wines. And Casal Santa Maria is another one to look out for. They're doing some really interesting things with blending traditional and modern winemaking techniques.
So it sounds like there's a good mix of established producers and newer folks who are maybe pushing the boundaries a little bit.
Exactly. And there's a real sense of community and shared passion among the producers in Colares. They're all committed to preserving the traditions of the region and making sure that Ramisco continues to thrive.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about history, terroir, grape characteristics, winemaking, even food pairing. As we look to the future, what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities facing Ramisco and the Colares region?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is climate change. Colares is already this marginal climate for grape growing, and any shifts in temperature or rainfall patterns could have a significant impact on the vineyards.
Yeah, that's a concern for wine regions all over the world these days.
It is. And then there are the usual suspects, pests and diseases. They're always a threat. And with Ramisco being such a rare grape, it's important to protect those old vines and make sure that they're healthy and productive.
And I imagine preserving the traditional way of life in Colares, that's got to be a challenge as well.
It definitely is. With Lisbon so close by, there's always the pressure of development, and it's important to make sure that those vineyards don't get swallowed up by urban sprawl.
So balancing progress and preservation, not an easy task.
No, it's not. But I think there's a lot of reason for optimism. There's a growing awareness of the importance of sustainability in winemaking, and there's a real commitment from the producers in Colares to protect the environment and the heritage of the region.
So what do you see for the future of Ramisco?
I think it has a bright future, honestly. It's a grape that's finally starting to get the recognition it deserves, and more people are discovering the unique qualities of Ramisco wines. And, with the focus on sustainability and the efforts to preserve the traditions of Colares, I think we'll continue to see amazing wines coming out of this region for many years to come.
Well, I certainly hope so, because after this deep dive, I'm definitely a fan.
Me too.
So to wrap things up, if there's one thing you want our listeners to remember about Ramisco, what would it be?
I think it would be that Ramisco is it's a wine of place. It's a wine that truly expresses the character of this very specific and very special corner of Portugal. It's a story of resilience, adaptation, and a deep connection to the land. And I think that's what makes it so compelling.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Mm-hmm.
So there you have it, folks. Ramisco, a grape with a story to tell.
Mm.
And as we always say, the world of wine is full of hidden gems waiting to be discovered.
Yeah.
So keep exploring, keep tasting, and who knows what you might find. Cheers.